but in the 1970s, there really wasn't anything equivalent to this, where you would go into an apartment, and they would have like glass jars filled with all of the different kinds of strains of marijuana that you might want, and you could hang out there and sample the wares, and then buy in bulk. So Forçade, even before High Times started, and in fact, I think this was part of how he funded High Times. He was kind of perfecting the idea of the New York City dispensary.
Yeah, and they even had dial-a-joint. Mickey Cesar had dial-a-joint, and it's 212-777-CASH that you could call up, and the guys on bicycles would come and deliver the marijuana to you. They can go to his little apartment over there at, I think it was 9.5 Bleecker Street. It was like a little closet where this guy lived. The next door you had 9 Bleecker Street, which was Yippie headquarters. Across the street was Studio 10, the nightclub, which was later renamed the Tom Forçade Multimedia Center. Above that was A.J. Weberman, the head of the Jewish Defense Organization and the Yippies. And John Draper, Captain Crunch, lived up there. He used to crash up there, too.
You're right.
The phone freak, yeah. So that was, man, what a time. What a time. What a time. Now you meant we talked. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I talked to John Draper a little bit,
really?
And, he was kind of cagey on something that I had heard, which was that Forçade had asked him to tap the phones at High Times, tap people's offices.
Really?
And he said, well, I didn't really, I might have, what did he call it? Maybe like I might have done a bridge tap or two. But he didn't really want to confirm that for me.
Well, that's pretty good, man, because I remember being at Studio 10 one time when the phone company showed up because we had all these phone lines and that no one was paying a bill for. And they wanted to come in and find out what was going on, and we had to kind of like shoo them away. Okay, we didn't have Tom Forçade there with his weapons, but we got rid of them quick enough. But which brings us to another point too, like the I guess what would you call it? Like the concert promotion type, like the shakedowns of the concerts, right?
Yeah.
Okay, what do you got there? Describe that.
Sure. So Woodstock was going on just around the time that Forçade was, becoming well, I was going to say a public face, but he didn't like his face photographed. But around the time that he was meeting all of these counterculture characters, and at the end of the 60s, and Woodstock, quite famously, Abbie Hoffman tried to get up on the stage and make a speech about. It was actually about John Sinclair. It was about, freeing John Sinclair from prison for his marijuana sentence. And Pete Townsend smashed Abbie Hoffman with his guitar, and Abbie Hoffman left the stage. So that was kind of, a demonstration of, just how little the rock and roll scene wanted, politics involved on that level. So what a bunch of people decided to do was, in the rock festivals that followed Woodstock, they wanted to make sure they got a cut of the profits that they could then put into radical causes. So there was a lot of intimidating promoters and saying, like, look, we can reach the underground press, but you need to give us a cut. Or in the case of, there was a Randall's Island New York Pop Festival where they were, even more demanding, and they wanted, bands from, the local bands from the Bronx to play, and they wanted to be able to play Weather Underground communiques on the PA. And so I talk at some length about this Randall's Island fiasco, really. For starters, a lot of the bands were not getting paid, so canceled at the last minute. It was kind of a much uglier version of Woodstock. It wasn't quite Altamont, but it was a lot of people, breaking down fences and starting to riot a little bit. And one thing that would have been very interesting had the bands been playing is there was supposed to be a jam session with like Miles Davis and Jack Bruce and Eric Clapton.
Wow.
God knows what that would sound like, but it never happened. But there is footage of the Randall's Island Festival, and it looks like a real downer. So Forçade, I guess that wasn't even enough. He also was involved in something called Winter's End, which was similarly a disaster. They couldn't get the permissions to hold the festival at the last minute, and that happened down in Florida, also in 1970. And there's, I talk about police chasing the promoters around a motel pool, and biker gang trying to rip off all the profits, and Johnny Winter doing so much acid that he was on stage for like 4 hours.
Yeah, it was a bizarre collective of young lords and the White Panthers. And I think that's where, like, by the way, the Young Lords was Geraldo Rivera. Okay, worked for the Young Lords. And Felipe Luciano and Pablo Guzman. All these guys went on to these huge careers in TV and radio. But that was the coalition that Forçade had put together to shake down these guys.
And there was also the Medicine Ball Caravan, which is which was a way that Warner Brothers thought that they could follow up the Woodstock film success. So they staged a cross-country music festival and got a film crew to capture all of this. And Forçade followed this whole thing around and basically disrupted everything. He got David Peel to play on the roof of his Cadillac. Forçade was driving around this tricked out Cadillac, and David Peel would play songs and heckle the people who were traveling along with this music festival. There have also been hints that maybe Forçade was paid by Warner Brothers.
Oh, really?
To create a spectacle, and Forçade himself was kind of cagey about that. He wrote something that was kind of, it was almost as though he didn't want to totally deny this idea. So once again, his intentions are a little bit hard to discern. But there's also this movie, The Medicine Ball Caravan. You can see footage of Forçade and David Peel, almost getting into a knife fight with one of the organizers, and that is definitely the highlight of that movie.
Yeah, David Peel, another one just recently passed away in the past few years. Another loss that we've had here. What about his girlfriend, Gabrielle Shang? Did she contribute, or is she still alive?
Yeah, yep, she's still around. She was his girlfriend, and they were married in '77. So she's actually his widow.
Oh, really?
And she had come from a very kind of sheltered background, but then sort of threw herself into radical politics. And she was kind of a little more aligned with the yippie crowd in Miami, and it was after this 1972 Zippy Yippie fight. She later reconnected with Forçade after she'd been working at the Berkeley Barb, and she'd been like handling SLA communiques in Berkeley, and he really courted her very aggressively, and they got together. She moved to New York, and she was involved in the Underground Press Syndicate. It changed its name to the Alternative Press Syndicate, and so she was heavily involved in that. And I think there was always a little bit of a sort of a standoff vibe between her and some of the Zippies who thought that she was more part of the Abby and Jerry group. So
I think for a while she was. I think for a while she was in Miami, right?
In Miami she was, yes. Yes.
Yeah, and then she became she was covering the Patty Hearst kidnapping, and she was receiving cassette tapes, right? And was like a transit for the communications.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And you think people would be more interested in this kind of stuff, like the High Times guy, and his girlfriend, his wife. I didn't know that was his wife.
Yeah.
Was involved in all this stuff. No one knows. Geraldo Rivera involved in Shaking Down. No one knows. There's
a great little anecdote that I got from someone who was like a 14-year-old. He was kind of like a Cameron Crowe type. He was a 14-year-old reporter, yeah. And he was trying to do a high school project, and he was calling all these places trying to get an assignment. And Gabrielle gave him an assignment to write about the Zippies for the Alternative Press Syndicate's magazine. And so he tells me this story of going over to 9 Bleecker and these guys kind of like looking out through a slot in the door.
Yeah, that's probably me. That was my job.
And they were like, he said they were really paranoid about this like 14-year-old kid who wanted to talk to them. But he actually had a nice, time talking to them and wrote a story for it. And anyway, this guy turned out, his name's R.J. Cutler, and he grew up to be an Oscar-winning documentarian. He made that movie, The War Room, about Bill Clinton.
Wow.
He's had a very illustrious career, but this was sort of like his entree into journalism was going over to 9 Bleecker and meeting, Darren Kay and Mike Chance and those guys.
And now, what year was that?
That was in 76.
Yeah, I would have been there, yeah. Now, and also, it's the funniest thing is you talk about this door at 9 Bleecker, okay? It was a big, giant, thick wooden plywood door, like you said, with a big peephole in it. And when you had to leave, there was no lock on the outside. You had to lock it from the inside. So someone always had to be locked inside to guard whatever's going on upstairs that we couldn't talk about, okay? We're running out of time, though. We're running out of time. I want to hear about the death. There's a lot of conspiracy and allegations and suspicion about what I believe was a suicide. But what did you conclude?
I think so too. I mean, there are a number of theories, and I did speak to people who knew Tom well, people from High Times, people from the political arena, who just said, I will never believe it's a suicide. Like, until the day I die, I will never believe that he committed suicide. But I tend to think that that is what happened. He had there was a very deep history of depression and bipolar disorder in his family. I get into that I go back to the 19th century talking about some of his family history, and I think his depression was pretty well documented by a lot of people who knew him. It got a lot worse in 78. His best friend died in a plane crash in a smuggling operation that Forçade was a part of. He was also stressed about, Larry Flynt had been shot. Larry Flynt was the distributor of High Times at that moment, and Forçade was worried that people were coming for him, and he was not not only was he not being treated properly for his bipolar disorder, but he was taking a lot of Quaaludes, I think. And he had gone out to Hollywood to try to get Robert Evans involved in making a movie, and that had gone poorly. Evans was only interested in Forçade's cocaine connection. Yeah. So there were a number of things that were really, Forçade was spiraling about. And so, as much as someone might, have a theory that, an assassin came through an unlocked window, I I tend to think that he shot himself.
Yeah, and